Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. What's especially fulfilling is when you have other rabbits that can join in making this rabbit hole deeper, and as a result of more cooperation from people with different viewpoints, different experiences, different angles, the depth of your seeking can become more successful. So today I'm particularly overjoyed to have with me talent sitting here with me. That would be Robert Burchell, who's in city planning at Rutgers University, and my dear guest, Carl Pearson, who my viewers have seen many times, known for his innovative workaround approaches to some of the most dismal problems that we have. And I'd also like to welcome on the telephone Norman Kurland. He's with the Center for Economic and Social Justice. So welcome, gentlemen, here in the studio.
Thank you.
And welcome, Norman, calling in from Virginia.
Well, thank you, Paula.
First, I'd like to say I've just done a show with Robert Burchell about city planning. Mm-hmm. And city planning, when I was going to high school at UC Berkeley, was the hottest department going at UC Berkeley. And you know, we were all going to save the world. That's what was in the air. It was sort of the hippie thing happening. The summer of love. I was a little young for it, but you could listen to the radio and you could dream. And it seemed as though the department that was actually addressing higher states of consciousness was city planning. Mm-hmm. So later on in my life, I had different experiences, teaching meditation, going into the prisons. I made money in cellular telephone, and that's what gave me a real feeling of what capital ownership meant, because I had a couple $1 million. So I was tired of teaching in the prisons because the warden, he wanted the program, but there was no money for it. So I thought, well, let me try it another way. I went to Cyprus, and I got interested in renewable energies and to design an eco-village. So I brought people who, I think it was, there was some center in Wales that was talking about creating villages using sustainable technology so you don't have to deplete the Earth's resources. So, I tried that for a while and then came to New York, and oh my God, once I hit New York, I found some people who were working on a documentary called Mystery of the Sphinx. And Mystery of the Sphinx talked about the water erosion on the Sphinx, showing that mankind is far older than we ever thought it was. And it also spoke of civilizations prior to ours that may have been more successful. So sometimes there's this feeling that we are a wasteful society. We're using too many resources, and as a result, we're going to be punished. We're running out. Others are saying, are we really looking at what the resources are that we're having, and maybe we are not sharing the abundance enough. Now, I was always attracted, once I understood what binary economics was, you weren't taking away from Peter to pay Paul. And I know some people say, well, it's a very heady topic, it's more abstract. But I know you, Norman, having worked with Louis Kelso, who was a practical attorney, actually had an experience of enriching the common man. And I know Carl has workaround solutions of what we can do with the crisis today as people don't have jobs, so they can't pay their mortgages. If they can't pay their mortgages, then the housing courts are going to turn people out on the streets. And even though we have very creative and powerful city planning departments, without money, they can't plan. So is anybody really inspired to jump in at any point here?
Well, this is Norm, but it's very exciting when you're talking about city planning, because after I joined it with Kelso, the head of the Department of City Planning at Berkeley was the chairman. I can't even remember his name. This was, I'd say, in 1976, when we formed a group called Agenda 2000, which, and I'm trying to remember his name. If you knew whoever was there, chairman in 1976, And we started, and we put together a plan for the redevelopment of New England, presented it to the Office of Economic Opportunity, the regional branch of that, for looking at applying the Kelso models for broad-based ownership in terms of community development. And I don't know, Paula, do you remember who was the chairman then? In my, my memory cell isn't there right now.
No, Norman, I'm sort of a recent enthusiastic binary economics follower.
Yeah.
So I don't know that.
But this was in city planning. He was the chairman of city planning.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me that in that department you would have somebody sort of perk up and pay attention to the economic problem.
Right. And so we worked together. He was chairman, I was president of Agenda 2000.
Have you ever heard of Louis Kelso, Robert? I'm talking to Robert Burchell now.
I have not. Could you explain, or could Norman explain what?
Norman, could you explain who Louis Kelso was?
And also binary economics.
And also binary economics, as Carl so right.
Well, in a nutshell, Milton Friedman in Time magazine said Kelso turns Karl Marx on his head. Okay, that's a quick way of telling you that Marx, the central premise in the Communist Manifesto was the abolition of private property because of the concentration of monopoly capitalism, etc. Kelso, in the 50s, 58, wrote a book with a terrible title, co-authored with the Aristotelian Thomist philosopher Mortimer J. Adler, who just died a little while ago. And the book was called The Capitalist Manifesto. But it really didn't describe, I think the word capitalism doesn't describe it at all. I call it the just third way. And essentially what he said was, well, he agreed with Marx's analysis why a laissez-faire system would not work if there was maldistribution in the ownership of the means of production. Where Marx said the central premise of Marx was the abolition of private property, and he had 10 points all aimed at how to abolish private property and turn over ownership to the dictatorship of the proletariat, hoping that the state would wither away. Kelso, on the other hand, and Adler, who was a former socialist, saw Kelso's idea. Adler used to teach at Columbia, and then he taught at the University of Chicago. He put together the great books of the Western world, that program, and he was the editor-in-chief of the Encyclopedia Britannica 3, a guy who really understood ideas. He asserted that Kelso's idea was the most important idea of the century, saying that ownership is the source of power, and you got to spread it out. If you concentrate it, you're going to have the mess we're in today. In any event, Kelso, being a lawyer, also invented techniques which enable people who had no property to become owners, using the logic of corporate finance, credit, and we were able to get through the Congress some laws, about 20 laws, for workers to become owners. It's called employee stock ownership plans. Have you ever heard of those?
The ESOPs.
ESOPs. I see that Carl is shaking his head, nodding in agreement, right?
Can I make an adverse criticism at this point?
Yes. Yes.
The thing that I worry about is what's happening to our economy,
right.
And when employees of a corporation obtain money from a bank,
right.
to give that money to the present shareholders of the corporation.
Right.
This corporation becomes over-leveraged and unable to continue, and the people who are buying the corporation, namely the employees, are probably putting themselves out of a job as a result.
Right.
I think that's what's been happening there.
Are you understanding lawyer to lawyer, Norman?
Good. Pardon, are you a lawyer?
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful, because I've done ESOPs, 100% leveraged ESOPs, buying out companies entirely with bank credit. I've also was orchestrating the first of the 100% leverage buyout that South Bend laid, which was organized by the United Steelworkers. It was about ready to be liquidated. And we raised $9.4 million, and it saved 500 jobs in the old Studebaker plant in South Bend. Now, there was a problem with it. And the major problem, and I used to work for Walter Reuther before I joined with Kelso, who was head of the United Auto Workers. And Reuther was advocating things before he died in an airplane crash in 1968. But in any event, the point you're making is precisely why most politicians or many people who are progressive in mind, and particularly the unions themselves, oppose the ESOPs. And that is, there's a theory in the law, the prudent man rule, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where you should diversify rather than put all your eggs in one basket. And that's the legal concept, is that, but there are two prudent man rules, as Kelso would say. One is the prudent man rule for the rich man, and that's diversification. Once you've accumulated a lot of ownership, then what you have to do is spread it out in order to preserve what you have. But then there's the poor man's prudent man rule. Andrew Carnegie stated that, and Mark Twain stated it in the same language. And that is, you put all your eggs in one basket, you watch the eggs, you make sure they hatch, because you can control that. Now, the real problem in the world is that there are legal and financial barriers of access to credit. Credit is a social thing, you see? And what Kelso developed was a way of saying the little guy, the people who have no accumulations, have no way of having access to ownership because you finance your growth out of past accumulations. That is either through retained earnings or through borrowings, or you need collateral in order to become an owner. And of course, that means that the rich, as you probably know, the top 1% own more than the bottom 90% combined. And the way we finance our new capital, and this has been going on since the Industrial Revolution began, we finance our capital, and Marx pointed this out too, capital breeds capital for those who own it. So what Kelso looked at was he developed an entire system which said that you had to democratize capital credit. You have to democratize money power. You have to be able to get money to acquire the growth increment of the system. So that there's a book that we put out called Capital Homesteading for Every Citizen. It's a blueprint. You can download it free at www.cesj.org. And so this is this is our book taken from Kelso, looking at the entire tax system, looking at central banking, Federal Reserve, a monetary system, and
excuse me, Norman, I'm so excited about what you're saying, but the problem I'm constantly coming up against is even if a lot of my viewers go to the website, they download it, they become excited like I do about it, it always seems it has this problem of cracking through to the academic institutions.
That's right.
And today we have with us Robert Burchell talking about city planning and how he got into city planning, and he's head of the Center for Urban Planning at Rutgers.
You know, this is wonderful because we're doing something in one of the poorest cities of the country, East St. Louis, okay? And we've developed, for city planning, Bucky Fuller was in there and Kelso was in there before I was involved. We got 11 mayors together, and they have organized what's called the Metro East Citizens Land Cooperative. So the first thing we want to do is capture the land, and every man, woman, and child in the East St. Louis and its neighboring communities in what's called America's bottoms. It's a floodplain that's only protected by levees. But in any event, Bucky wanted to develop a new city called Old Man River City. And Catherine Dunham, the great dance artist, brought Bucky in, and Kelso. And he was talking about a whole new city, and Bucky has this in a number of his books. In any event, we've been working with Bucky and Kelso have been dead since the 90s. We've been working with the community and one of the political leaders there who just passed away. But in any event, we got the mayors together.
Are they
legislation that passed the Illinois House 114-0 to authorize community investment corporations, or they could be called citizens land cooperatives. And that's the term that they're using in East St. Louis. And we're now engaged right now looking at sustainable energy systems, looking at, we have the former university architect at Georgetown University, and there are a bunch of NASA power technology people involved.
No, hang on, Norman, I'm excited again, but I want to make sure that Robert is on our page here. Have you heard of Buckminster Fuller?
Not really, but I just want to make a comment here, and I think that Norman's approach is an inspiring approach. But in order really for that to get a foothold in any of its particular locations, there has to be an almost uniform lack of interest in the area or the land. So if you're talking about a Studebaker automobile assembly plant that's going out of business, or South Bend Lathe, or this area of East St. Louis, and by the way, Norman is absolutely right about East St. Louis. When you look at the most depressed cities in the United States, and you find that you have Detroit and Newark at the bottom, you then look a whole half distance lower where there's nothing in between other than depressed statistics, and you get to East St. Louis and Camden. And they are the really almost the from on any economic index very, 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 very depressed places. But the point I'm trying to make is that they're war zones, and the foothold has to be taken in these kinds of places, and there is an adequate place for this group, this psychology, to begin to take hold and thrive. In normal kinds of markets, and in the hot markets, you're not going to be able to get access to either capital or property or any of the only reason you can get access in these kinds of situations is because no one else wants it. No one else wants it. So in order to begin to bring about what Norman is really talking about, the conditions have to be so intolerable as it relates to either the future of a particular firm or the future of a particular city that no one else wants it, and as a result of that, people are willing to try this new strategy or approach.
You know, Bob, it sounds like hopeless Indiana. I want Carl Pearson, Norman, to tell you that he got a mayor that he calls hopeless Indiana to buy his program, and again, it seems. Does it inspire you to say anything?
Yes, right now we're moving into creating jobs in hopeless Indiana, and that's not the real name of the town. But
I know.
I can't give the town away because it might injure my ability to work this way in the town. And
excuse me, Norman, before you freak out at the term jobs, because a binary economist talks about capital ownership as giving more of the wealth, that just it's more about tasks. so that people who have the ability, the inclination, the talent to do something that's of some use to somebody else that needs that something done can make the connection. And the idea is to use the internet.
Yeah.
And I know his idea works because a girlfriend of mine in Brooklyn needed her speakers to work on her computer, and she couldn't get her speakers to work. So she paid $25 to Craigslist, and she got 3 people who for $25 came over and fixed her speakers. Now, if she didn't have to pay that $25, I think it would have worked even better. And the challenge Carl has is to take an area, and he felt a town of about 10,000. For about $25,000, you could have, instead of stock account managers, you'd have managers that could help them develop their tasks or how they would advertise for it. So I just want to say, in the short time that we have here on set, we're talking about 2 different approaches. One is capital ownership, some share in capital ownership, and one is being able to help each other and not be depressed and discouraged just because we don't have a job. We can become like independent contractors.
Right, but it's not either or.
Exactly, it's not either or, right?
Right. I'm creating the
go together.
Now, Norman, can you go on a speakerphone? Gloria is thinking in the control room. No. What do you want him to do? Because we're still having problems with Norman. Well, let's Carl express what you're doing, and Norman, just listen. We'll clear it next time.
I've created a marketplace for tasks as a replacement to the diminishing jobs market that we have. Jobs in America are declining for a variety of reasons. That they're no longer as available as they were before because of government regulation, the taxation, withholding, insurance, liability, bricks and mortar costs, and so on, and the advent of the Internet. For that reason, there's been a decline, and globalization. There's been a decline in jobs. They have been absolutely diminishing in number as well as in quality. So I'm saying, what is the replacement for this? We have to have something to replace it. So I said, well, if you look at jobs, they only are a collection of tasks. If people can market their tasks, they can actually perform them directly to the people who want to be the recipients of those tasks. And that's just a new marketplace. And I want to go in to Hopeless, and out of the 10,000 people, I want to identify 3,000 of them and have managers that will assist them in putting their tasks on as keywords in my website, and then to spend $100 per person, that's $30,000, to market the hell out of those tasks in the 25-mile radius around the town.
Right, so people will know to go to the website.
So people will then know who they can buy their tasks from.
Yeah, I understand that.
But if the government then did that, if the federal government did that, the cost of doing that for 100 million people in America would be the huge, fantastically large sum of $10 billion. And we could have employment for everyone.
If you're considering employment. But I think, Norman, what Robert was bringing up from the point of view of city planning is a city planning department doesn't want to only plan for the very bottom as East St. Louis. Is that what you were getting at?
Community. You're looking for inclusionary communities, not exclusionary.
Right.
So, we're all agreed on that.
Yeah, I think, again, I think we're all agreed. But I think that we need a couple of points of clarification.
Right.
One, until the middle of this decade, we have net positive employment growth in the United States on a year by year basis. Now, that may not be. There may be decreases in some areas, and there may be very significant increases in other areas. But as a whole, we have net employment growth in the United States on a year by year basis until we've come to this particular point in time, and no one knows what the net is going to be, and we may, in fact, be in decline at this particular point. So in terms of the long run, though, we have experienced very significant...
Excuse me, you're saying we're having increased employment throughout the years?
Yes.
Because excuse me, Norman, I don't know if you heard that.
No, it's true.
Okay.
Growing employment. On the other hand, there's suddenly you have a global financial crisis, and Microsoft is laying off thousands of people, and so on. So there's now a crisis in the world.
Well, let's just get back to the data and the history. Up until the middle of this decade, we have had constant, except for the Depression, and then some odd years during the war years, we've had constant increases in employment in the United States. Now, earlier on, those were good and solid jobs. They may be more related to a service economy currently, but there has been an increase.
That's what you mean, quality.
In employment. So really, I think the point that Carl is making is that yes, employment is growing, but the real good jobs are not growing, and access to the real good jobs is not uniformly available. And the point that I was really making with Norman is that in order to go where Norman wants to go, no one is going to surrender the turf that will allow him to go there unless that turf is worth zero. And so then there's an ability to experiment with the kinds of programs that Norman is talking about, but only in those cases. In other words, you weren't interested in Studebaker couldn't do anything until they were failing. South Bend Lathe couldn't do anything until it was failing. You can't do something in prime areas of Manhattan.
We have 1 minute left, and I know that, Norman, you're going to have something to say about it, so we're going to have a part 2. We can go on for about 10 minutes, but what I'm going to do is post this. I'm going to put it open to my viewers. I'm going to ask for feedback, and I'm going to ask if we can all study each other's shows, because, Norman, we had a couple great shows with Robert before you called in, and I'm hoping that we can continue on. It's very hard to hear you, Norman, that we didn't get the technicals down very well. Can you hear me now? Hello? I guess we lost Norman.
But I'm very intrigued listening to both Robert and Carl, and really I'd love to sit down with them, and so that they got a better understanding of what I'm talking about.
Norman, can you come to New York?
Well, I haven't planned to.
Let's think. Are you ever in D.C., either of you?
Sure.
Well, if you get to D.C., that would be...
Well, Jane Goldberg and I are going to Washington on the 30th. Maybe we could meet up with you then. Do a show for Jane. Jane's a new producer. Well, anyway. I think we really need you in person, Norman.
Yes.
We can get a panel. Maybe we can do something with St. Mark's Church, I keep hoping, or the synagogue next door.
That would be interesting. But I really would love to sit down, with Carl and Robert, because I realize that they are only getting a piece of what I'm saying.
I know.
Because I haven't had a chance to present it. And if you sit down, you do have a greater opportunity. I would just encourage them to go to our website, which is a virtual library, and from that they will see what's going on.
That would be the Center for Economic and Social Justice, CESJ.org.
Yeah,
right.
They go to that, and if they're interested and they'll get our East St. Louis project there. They go into the library. They'll be able to see the big plan, the energy plan, how we're proceeding. They'll also see how you change the monetary system and credit system, so that yes, it's true that you don't change paradigms until people are desperate. On the other hand, by changing the laws, you do get things that happen without desperation, and that's what we've done. We're architects.
Excuse me, Norman, I want Carl to say something on that, because he was talking about this new Obama regime, and we were talking about, remember, with the medical hemp, how to work around, because you didn't want to go down the route on constitutionality. Is there something that could be done in this case the same way that you said Obama could just make a taking.
Well, he could direct his attorney general not to enforce the federal laws if they're in conflict with legitimate medical laws of the states. I would suspect that they...
But is there anything in this case what Norman's saying about... Norman, what type of law has to be changed? Norman?
The Internal Revenue Code, the Federal Reserve Act, basically. But in any event, we have offered a total blueprint called capital homesteading.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you, Norman. It's just too Norman. It's too difficult to understand you right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to study it, put it together, post all of these, and then let's go deeper. Let's go farther.
Okay, here's one quick insight. What I advocate requires no legislation, and therefore we can do it.
Right.
And what Norman is advocating does require legislative insight and approval, and
right.
it's more distant and possibly even a much better program. But I offer
right.
something that can be done today.
Right. Well, I think we have to work on all fronts, gentlemen. So anyway, this is Paula Gloria. This has been an episode Farther Down the Rabbit Hole, and I thank you so much for joining me in person. And Norman, I thank you for calling in, and we're going to work on it to make the sound quality better. Fair enough? Hello? Goodbye, Norman. I think that's the best we could do for now.
That's good.
I don't know why it does that. It happened before that way. It doesn't seem to be from his phone. Anyway, we didn't get...
Well, that was on his end.
It was?
That was on his end.
So we were getting the signal fine?
He was probably on a cell phone.